Welcome to the Global Solutions Summit. My name is Markus Engels, and I'm the Secretary General of the Global Solutions Initiative. My guests today are three ambassadors of the Young Global Changers, and we're going to discuss G20-related topics. We have Nancy living and working at the west coast of the United States. She has roots in Bangladesh, and she is co-founder of the podcast, The Pursuit: Global Women for Change. There is Shukri, an entrepreneur, investor, and CEO from South Africa. Hello. And last but not least, Eduarda from Brazil, currently studying at the Columbia University in New York, and she is co-founder of the podcast The Pursuit: Global Women for Change as well. Hello to all of you. I hope you are all well in that very specific situation the world is facing at the moment, and I would like to know how the situation is in your region in respect of COVID-19. And Eduardo, would you like to start perhaps with a comparison between New York, where you live and work, and Brazil, where you come from? Both regions are hotspots of the pandemic. Please.
Thank you, Marcus, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting us to be here. I haven't been in Brazil for a couple of months, but I have been reading the news, and it's very, very sad what's going on in Brazil right now, because we now have 1,000 deaths for 3 consecutive days, more than 1,000 deaths, and we're second to the United States in numbers of people who have been who have faced deaths because of coronavirus. So the situation in Brazil is very complicated, and I see this in the region. But specifically for Brazil, we have a scenario in which governors and mayors are fighting against the president's guidelines against coronavirus. As some of you may know, President Bolsonaro, in the beginning, he didn't recognize the risks of coronavirus. So he took a long time to act. And his guidelines were not following necessarily the World Health Organization. So we had a Minister of Health that was following WHO's guidelines to combat coronavirus, and he was fired because of that. So during the pandemic, Brazil had a fired Minister of Health, and shortly after, another person took his place and resigned, unfortunately. So it is a very sensitive situation, especially politically, because Bolsonaro has also been accused of corruption in the last couple of weeks. So we're seeing how this will go, and I'm very afraid that it could possibly be an impeachment for Brazil, the third impeachment in 30 years, in the 30 years of democracy that we have. So it is very, very complicated. And in Latin America in general, we saw that Chile was about to have its constitution reviewed, and that was postponed. We were also waiting for elections in Bolivia, which were also postponed. So I think that in general, the democracy in Latin America has certainly been weakened, and we don't know where this is going to lead in the when we recover from COVID, hopefully
it's obviously a different situation in New York, but still, I mean, that is a hotspot as well. Could you say a word how the situation is there?
Yes, in New York, while I was there, they did enforce the lockdown, but it was late in comparison to other regions of the U.S. So we saw, for example, and Nancy will talk about that probably, but San Francisco enforced very strict rules for lockdowns right in the beginning. New York took did that a couple of days after, and I think that these couple of days made a huge difference for the results that we have seen so far. But I think that right now New York is recovering fast. What scares me is that I have been going around, and I traveled spent a couple of months in California too, and you see that people are not wearing masks. Some places are reopening, and the U.S. has different phases of reopening and going back to the economy as business as usual. But I don't see the measures being enforced. And I have seen this like in other places too, in Paris, people going to parks and not wearing masks. So I don't know where this is taking us, but I was just going to also like point out in comparison to Brazil, it's interesting to see what's going on here in the US, that you also have different states and governors providing different guidelines, that it's not always what the federal government is saying. And probably, again, Nancy can talk about it a little further.
Yeah, you built the bridge to Nancy, and of course, Nancy, you can perhaps compare the situation from the West Coast in the United States and Bangladesh, where you still have friends and family. So give us some insights from your perspective.
Yes, absolutely. And Eduarda gave a very helpful perspective of Brazil and what we're seeing in the US. And so I live near San Francisco in the Bay Area, and we are all shelter in place. And I think it's helped that California started pretty early compared to other states. And we're being pretty conservative, which is to help the public and our neighbors and everyone around us. Fortunately, also, I work in technology. I work at Adobe, and I have the opportunity to work from home. My husband does. My kids can be home and learn virtually. But I know that there's a lot of Americans who cannot work from home. And my mother is an essential worker, and she has to go into the store and work. And I think that it's also a privilege to have this opportunity to be able to shelter. And there's so many workers who have to go out. And so when I think about Bangladesh, there are those who can be home and work remotely, but a big part of the population also does have to go work outside of the home. And for Bangladesh, at like a bigger perspective, if we look into the garments industry, garments is a big part of the revenue for the country. Then also, it's a big part of the garments workforce are women who are sole providers for their family. And now their jobs are impacted, just like there's a lot of jobs that are impacted in the US. But for the women over there, that was their form of economic empowerment. And it would be interesting to see what will be happening in the next few months and how can they recover from this, and whatever wins they had to be financially independent, will that now be gone because big brands have pulled out their contracts with the country? And I think from that perspective, there's just so many other underlying issues when we think about how COVID is impacting us socially, how it's impacting us economically, how it's impacting just how we will be working together moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, and I think we are going to match a lot of or some points you just mentioned. But I would put the same question to Shukri. You are currently in South Africa. You live there, and perhaps you can give us an impression how the situation is in your country and on the whole continent.
So thank you very much for the opportunity. I like other developing markets, I think Africa is a story of asymmetrical growth and inequality. And to Nancy's point, the whole concept of being able to be in lockdown is a deeply kind of developed concept. You know, when a large percentage of the population lives from hand to mouth and is unable to, have stockpile and have savings and sort of stay home for a period of time. And so I think from an African perspective, it's been difficult to roll out not only the health support, but then also the laws that can support the kind of unequal nature of the economy. And I think that what's interesting is that what it's also done is exacerbate existing lines of access to the gig economy and lack of digitalization. So if you happen to be a business that has access to digital platforms and the internet, you have a chance and you have a lifeline of staying kind of connected. And if you don't, you fall further behind. And so I think that the question is, how do governments support businesses? Because I think governments are really good at taxing and taking money from citizens and businesses and firms, but how do they stand up and not just give speeches and say we're giving these massive slush funds of money? How do you actually effectively get it to the firms and the people that need it? And I think that in Africa, we've been unable to actually get it down to the person on the street. And I think that, in short, it's been catastrophic. And I think that it's going to be something that's going to affect our public accounts as a country and as a continent in the respective countries. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how we use this as an opportunity to digitize and modernize our economy to compete globally going forward.
Yeah, I think you really made an important point mentioning the social situation and the situation of business. And you are an entrepreneur yourself. You are a CEO and you are in business. So can I just ask, especially when it comes to small and medium enterprises? I mean, we all know that local distribution change and creating jobs are mainly made by small and medium enterprises. So what is your expectation? What needs to be done not only to overcome the medical challenges, but to foster sustainable economy recovery and to tackle the social crisis?
So, to be quite frank, I think what we are facing as South Africa and certainly other countries in Africa is the potential of people starving, the potential of people sort of staying home and trying to self-isolate and trying to distance, and then not having any sort of savings and having any sort of access to being able to feed their families. And so what we see is that we have highly developed financial products and systems and banks that don't support small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly in moments like this. And so I think, again, it's a question of saying, how do not only governments support, but how do financial institutions support small and medium enterprises to be able to survive a period like this? And again, some tough questions have to be asked. Which industries, which businesses need to survive? Maybe some of them need to fail, and some of them need to be, supported in different areas of the economy so that people can repurpose themselves and kind of pivot from one industry to the other. So I'm deeply invested in media, and those are the type of businesses that perhaps have a level of resilience to be able to adapt. But I also have investments in food and restaurants that, at times, without my hat on as the co-owner of businesses like that, perhaps some of those businesses need to fail, and we need to sort of step back and say, how do we now rethink the skills and the people that we have within those particular businesses to be able to compete globally?
So you are making a strong argument, if I get you right, to really use that opportunity, especially support by government and states for business, to see which business, which system of economy is needed to make a society more resilient. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think if I speak from a South African context, we have a highly developed financial, almost Switzerland-like financial system. And then we have the 80% of our population that is very similar to Bangladesh, where the financial products need to be different. And so when you live in this kind of deep inequality, it's something that is only exacerbated by COVID-19. And that I think that we can live in this kind of delusion that this is not something that will at some point rear up and affect, and you can build our walls higher and higher as people who are in the inner circle and people who are connected and people who are in part of the inclusive part of the first economy. But how do we break that down? How do we rethink what business is and what the role of business is in society, and what type of capitalism we need to be able to espouse as business people? And again, I think that the level of measurement and the level of support needs to be at firm level, because I think that it's what happens in homes and families and businesses that reflect what happens within a particular country.
Okay, thank you for that. Of course, we can't have that debate without mentioning the digitalization, because people saying that might be giving a push to it. Everybody, as we are at the moment, are using calls like that, and we can exchange from around the world. So there might be a change. I was wondering, Nancy, we had some interesting global tables at the Global Solutions Summit this year where people mentioned the cultural aspect of it. We had some people from Asia saying, for us, the internet is a sort of a freedom tool. It's freedom of expression. We have a window to the rest of the world, and that is very powerful and important for us. While, for example, in Europe, we have that debate of strengthening digitalization will lead to civilians and more state control. So I'm wondering if there is a sort of, because you are representing the young global changes as well, is there a sort of generational perspective on that, or is it the same differentiation as in the rest? What is your assumption on that?
No, thank you. That's a great question. From just a young global changer perspective, our group is so diverse from so many different countries that I'm sure that if we asked everyone, they would bring in a different perspective. But if we think about it at a higher level, being able to be digitized and communicate in virtual environments is key to socializing. And the fact that we're all here together right now and having this discussion, despite the fact that we're from different parts of the world, it's a huge advantage. And freedom of speech, which you were discussing, that is important. And I think that our generation is very vocal about what we think. We're part of the hashtag generation. We share, we're very active on social media. But at the same time, we are also the generation which is very aware of how our information can be collected because of the platforms that we're on, how our activities can be tracked, and really thinking about privacy in this world. And so in the US, privacy is a big topic. There's privacy acts that have been gone into place in California, also discussions in the US. And I think that is something that will keep becoming an issue, especially with the fact that because of COVID-19, we're all online, especially our children are online. And while us parents are working and maintaining the house and doing all the different things we do, our kids are online. And to be honest, like 70% of the time, I don't know what they're doing online. And I'm hoping they're doing their schoolwork, but there could be like other things that they're getting engaged with. And so there's like additional things to think about, which I don't think people have really thought about yet. But and it's also something that is relevant for Bangladesh as well, as the country is getting connected and talking with everyone from different places. But that's just one thing to think about.
I 100% understand what you are talking about, especially when it comes to the kids in the internet. All of you, and that was very powerful, mentioned the social question. And I'm asking myself, what is your expectation, Nancy? Well, that goes to Eduardo and Shukri as well. I mean, we are talking about platform economy, and on the other hand, we are talking about social distancing and social inequalities, and perhaps this platform economy is pushing that inequality. And therefore, my question is: do you have any advice, Nancy, or all of you, what needs to be done really to perhaps enforce these businesses to really pay their fair share for society?
I think that in order to make it a fair share for society, it has to be equitable, it has to be accessible. Technology can't only be given to those who have money or who are educated and have the time to sit and access information. We have to find ways, go out of our way to give it to people who are poor or who are on the streets and who normally wouldn't be able to access information, and making sure that they're given time to be able to attend a class, or they're given the opportunity to engage in jobs or remote work possibilities, which wasn't an option before, which could be a huge opportunity. Facebook announced that their employees can go remote, which means they can now tap into talent which is from all over the world. So our location is no longer a constraint. So these are things to think about.
Okay, thank you for that. Eduardo, I would like to know, many G20 members are trying to link the economic stimulus programs with innovation measurement, for example, to push green economy. From your perspective, you're an expert on climate change and the debate. What do you think? Will the pandemic lead to will that give a push to the climate movement, or will it be a major problem because nobody is thinking about the climate change and everybody is concentrating on pandemic? What is your assumption?
Yes, that is a great question, and that is the answer that everyone's looking for right now. I think that the answer has to be concentrated in different regions because, as always, we see Europe leading this dialogue, saying that the recovery packages have to be green, but you don't see the same type of the strength in the speech in the global South. Because when inequality is in the center of this pandemic, what everyone's thinking about is how you're going to help the people that are maybe going even deeper down in poverty. So I think that at this moment, what we need is that the international community mobilize themselves to support the global South. As always in the climate change discussions, they talk a lot about technology transfer and how you're going to support financially countries that have to reduce carbon emissions. And I think that right now, most importantly, is reminding these countries and involving them in the discussion, reminding them how important it is for them to implement the Paris Agreement on top of everything that they have been doing to recover the economy. And I say this because in one of the Global Solutions Summit roundtables, Lawrence Tubiana mentioned that the Green Deal has to be the center of our diplomacy. And there are some climate experts that defend, for example, trade tariffs being imposed to countries that do not follow or do not implement the Paris Agreement. So I think it's extremely important when we're talking about the G20 and other conference of the parties meetings that ministers of finance are included in this dialogue, and that they try to see a way in which we can recover economically, but also sustainably. And in this sense, I think it's very important to talk about sustainable infrastructure. That if our governments are not now thinking of the infrastructure that we want in the next decade, we'll be making all the wrong decisions. So I think that green finance instruments are also vital to foster the sustainable development that we want. And that's the kind of leadership that we expect from the G20.
Okay, thank you for that. And when you focus on the movement, obviously there's the strong green movement, the Friday for Futures movement, and do we have a complete new agenda internationally? So as I said before, there is no Friday for Futures at the moment. Or do you think perhaps this is a great chance because we see that the pandemic as well as the climate change, perhaps the technological questions as well and the poverty questions are all interconnected and linked. So what do you think will be the outcome for that movement, social movements?
I think that, and I say this because I was for 4 years part of a youth-led NGO that did activism for climate change, and I'm a big fan of the Fridays for Future movement and the symbol of Greta Thunberg. And I think that even though we're not going to the streets protesting for climate change and pressuring our governments, we are still doing it online. And I think it is as powerful as it is when we go to the streets. And there's also a component that we can't oversee, that we can't forget, is the fact that information about climate change has never been as great as it is now. We have a lot of people that we've always wanted to hear discussing these problems, which are usually being discussed in closed doors, that are now talking to the public, that are now open for questions, that are doing lives on Instagram, on social media. So, for example, for us to see Christiana Figueres, who's the godmother of the Paris Agreement, being able to talk online about her perspectives is something that we didn't have before. So we have all these climate leaders and experts joining the conversation online, and more I see that they're inviting the youth to learn more about what they want to see and what they are demanding for the future. So I think that even though it is a problem that we can't go to the streets, it's challenging. I'm also very optimistic about these conversations being strengthened online.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, it's fascinating listening to all of you because it's so powerful and so there is so much optimism in whatever you say that I'm not scared about the future because you are the young global changes. And the problem is we're running out of time, and therefore I would like to ask a last question to all of you, and I would like to start with Shukri. Let's say you have one wish and you could directly address to the G20 leaders, which is possible through that interview, I mean, what would your priorities really addressing the G20 leaders? What needs to be done immediately, and what would your perfect outcome of this year's G20 presidency? Shukri, please.
So I think at a time where we are feeling more separate than we ever have, I think, and you'd be proud of me as a young global changer when I say this, is we need to double down on our sense of multilateralism. And we need to ask ourselves, and the question I would ask the G20 is, what is the playbook? What is the solution set that we can create now for future big shocks that we're going to face as a global economy? Because I think if this has taught us nothing, it's that we are not islands, that we are deeply connected in what is happening from a health perspective in another part of the world, and that our kind of economies are deeply interconnected. And what we cannot afford is petty nationalism and trade wars. And we need to come together and use multilateralism to create playbooks and solution sets so that we can quickly adapt and pivot to problems that we have in, going forward.
Oh, thank you very much. Nancy, would you like to add your wish, your dream, your vision?
Yes. Well, first, they should definitely do what Shukri just said. And what I would like to share is that I believe the future of work is really important, like where we want to land in the next 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, and ensuring that people have ways to still earn and work and be able to provide for their families, which in turn helps our local economies and global economies. And in order to do that, making sure that education is accessible, making sure that people who want an education are not prohibited, such as women, and they can go and earn and have the financial option to be independent or codependent or whatnot. And that is something which we can all carry with ourselves as a society. And we should really get creative in how we can help make sure people still have ways to earn and provide for themselves.
Thank you very much, Nancy and Eduarda. You have the final word.
I think in addition, I would say that the G20 has definitely, the G20 should definitely take a bottom-up approach. It is very important, I think, to listen and involve as many people as you can in the conversation. And I know how challenging this is, but I think that the more diverse we are in these discussions on how to move forward, the better we'll be in tackling the problem. And I say this even for climate change, the importance of listening to the people that are most vulnerable to climate change, going to rural communities and indigenous communities. And I think that it is very important to have a strong coalition as the G20 supporting those that cannot be heard. So that would be the appeal I would make to the G20.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, all your wishes hopefully will be fulfilled, and then we are living in a better world, and that is my dream as well. I'm very thankful and grateful to Eduarda, Nancy, and Shukri. Bye-bye. Au revoir. Thank you very much. See you soon.